What's up, everybody? It's the second episode of the Campus View Real Estate Podcast. Today, we're going to be talking about the advantages of investing in BYU and UVU housing while you're going through school. Going to talk about some of the wheres and whys and hows. And without further ado, let's get started. So like I said, today we're going to be talking about BYU UVU, some of the unique features that they have as investment places of investment. And to get started, we're going to talk about the location specifically.
So when you're an agent showing homes, what is the unique opportunity that these buyers have being somewhere in between or close to two major universities? What would you say?
Yeah, it's a really unique situation, right? Because you have two universities that are literally 5 miles apart, if that. So for a landlord who's typically really concerned about occupancy, how they're going to fill those rooms, you've got 80,000 students that all need housing. And so it's really not a question that the occupancy is just so much higher in Provo, Orem than you'd probably find in a typical college town. There's such a shortage.
Didn't they reroute the public transportation to run perfectly through Orem to Provo to further the accessibility of both universities?
Yeah, totally. So, and that's another great thing, because for so long, Provo, Orem has struggled with parking. I mean,
oh my goodness!
Yeah.
Don't get me started
right?
on parking,
right?
man.
Every BYU UVU student, past, present, future, we all know that at some point you're going to run into problem with university towing.
Yes,
and
they are on it.
They are on it, and the parking in general is terrible. If you're trying to get anywhere, it's just really bad. And previously, BYU housing had a requirement that you had to have a certain amount of allotted parking spaces for a landlord in order to have, a certain number of students rent from you. So you'd get BYU approvals based on number of parking spaces. Now, however, because like you said, the public transportation is so accessible, there's an even greater opportunity for landlords than there used to be, because not every student is required to have a vehicle to navigate campus. You've got, the bus, the public transit system that runs all throughout the cities, and then you've also got quick access to the front runner that runs obviously from Provo up to where now? Doesn't it run all the way up to Ogden? The front runner?
So, yeah.
So students can get wherever they need to go for work or whatever, and still have the ability to use that public transit system to their advantage. So great thing for landlords. They're making it more and more accessible, more and more student life friendly, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Well, I think a lot of it has to do with the growth that we're experiencing with Utah Valley University, don't you think? Because I think up until this point in time, over the last decade or two, it's been BYU's been the powerhouse. Everyone's trying to focus on that campus housing, but yet with UVU's growth, and wanted to ask you a couple questions about that, but would you say that plays a big part in why they're trying to expand in a lot of different aspects to try and accommodate these two big universities?
Definitely. So UVU started in, I believe, the 1930s or 40s as a trade school.
That's old, man.
Yeah, we've been here, man. We Wolverines, we've been here for a long time.
Came with Brigham
Young. Brigham Young. Yeah, we predate Brigham Young. Not quite predating Brigham Young, but yes. So anyway, it was started out as a trade school, and then, as I understand it, in the 1980s became a technical college. In the 1990s, because of increased student growth, it became UVSC, which was the state college, until the early 2000s, when then it became a full-fledged state university, Utah Valley University. And since then, it has become the largest university in the state.
Whoa.
So
that's crazy.
yeah. So take that, BYU. It's and the great thing about UVU, open enrollment. Anyone who applies can get in. You know, there's the running joke that BYU and UVU students, what they both have in common is that they both applied to BYU. I did not apply to BYU. I would like it to be known.
Maybe you did. Maybe you just don't want it to be known.
I didn't do it.
The nice thing about UVU is I took UVU courses and got college credit in high school.
Totally.
And that's an incredible program.
Yeah,
that they
UVU's
have.
got a great concurrent enrollment program, and I think that lends itself to a lot of student growth in the university population, because people that are going to local high schools in the valley are then transferring their credits, continuing their education at UVU. So long story short, tons of growth that's led from that development, you know, trade school to tech school to state college to full-fledged state university. And UVU's in such a prime location right off the freeway. So it's got awesome access. And it's, you know, the campus is entirely indoors. So that's something that students love, something that I loved, because when you were walking from whatever David O. McKay building to Joseph Fielding Smith building,
yeah,
and you're freezing in the dead of winter.
It's cold, man. It's cold.
And you're walking up those awful stairs.
Walking down is more scary. I remember I just came down the stairs one time. It was snowing super hard. I was walking in front of the field house to get to the big parking lot. Completely ate it. Just fell flat on my back in the snow. Had some dude looking at me like I was crazy, and I was just laying there in the snow, because what else do you do besides make snow angels when you fall down?
Was he a good Samaritan? Did he stop to help, or
no?
Did he
just kind of looked at me. I tried to get up quick, but shoes didn't have the best traction, and at that point, maybe wish that all of my campus was indoors like UVU.
Yeah.
But
see, there you go. I mean, there's so many great things about UVU. We digress a little bit. So many great things about UVU, and that has just led to a population of, you know, 80 to 90,000 students in Utah Valley. Well, it's so
between the two. Okay.
Yeah, and I think it's probably closer to 80,000. But I know
crazy.
UVU enrollment I think was 43,000 for last year.
Whoa.
For fall semester. So just huge universities, huge opportunities for landlords. And then with that, let's maybe talk about the shortage of housing and the high housing demand in those college towns, and how that's led to rental increases.
Yeah, no, it's a great point. I think in talking to a lot of people, and especially when we would rent out our townhomes to fellow students, it was crazy how it just sold itself. There really was no anxiety behind the fact that it's like, oh man, how am I going to make this payment? I can't get 2, 3, 4 renters in here. And it all had to do with location.
Yeah. So what was that like how did you, as a landlord, put the public on notice that you had vacancy? And then, like, if that makes sense, how did you advertise? How did you get applicants? How long did it take you to get it rented?
Well, to be completely honest with you, I think it just depends on what the goal is. My situation was a little bit different because I grew up here, lived in Linden my whole life, and then when I went to Provo, had plenty of friends that were from high school that wanted to room with me. And so I talked to them first, said, hey, have this townhome. Do you guys want a room? And from there, it was just connections that were made at work, at school. And then I just saw the opportunity to charge I think at that time it was about $400 per shared room in my townhome.
Wow.
And then I even shared my master bedroom so that I would make a little bit more.
What a kind man.
I grace someone with my presence every now and then. No, just kidding. But I found it as an opportunity as a student that didn't make a ton of money. I thought I made good money selling suits at Mr. Mac, but
Yes, the
turns
Mac.
out there was a little bit more
Mac
profit.
strikes again.
Yep, it does. But it was honestly not a hard sell because of, I mean, people are trying to find contracts years in advance, not years, but at least a year or 6 months in advance, and everything's always sold out. You're always trying to sell contracts. You're always trying to move people around. And then on top of that, if you're wanting to live with someone that you know, it gets even harder, right?
Yeah, 100%. So that's a good point. I had a different experience because I think we purchased the house my senior year, the townhome. So a lot of my friends were married. They were doing their own thing. They didn't want to share rooms with me anymore. So I actually advertised on Rentler, KSL Classifieds, and Facebook Marketplace. And just like a flock of applicants. So easy to find tenants. A lot of people, and then obviously, Rentler will do a background check and a credit check and charge the tenant, and it's free to the landlord. So I did everything pretty much through Rentler and it was only briefly before my wife and I got married that I rented it, but I was able to find tenants like that. And just to your point, I think that's most landlords' experience. You do not have vacancy because there's such a housing shortage, and they are doing a little bit to mitigate that problem. So just in late 2021, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, BYU used to have a housing zone. So they have a BYU housing zone.
The approved housing for the university.
Totally.
Okay.
So they had a zone that started up by the Provo Temple and went on the west side of the Missionary Training Center, that road that goes I think at 2230 west. It goes all the way down to University Avenue and cuts across. And I think University Avenue is the east boundary, or was the east boundary. Doesn't really matter anymore.
Yeah,
because they lifted that.
Yeah.
But there was this BYU approved zone that people had to fall in, and there were BYU regulations that people had to follow. They had to follow, obviously, the honor code. Students had to sign that they would follow the honor code if they were going to BYU.
Yeah.
So
my roommates had to do that.
Yeah. But they actually and obviously BYU still follows and implements the honor code.
Totally.
However, as it pertains to housing, it's been really, really liberalized. So they've eliminated the BYU approved zone. They've opened it up to, BYU student could live anywhere as long as they sign the appropriate waivers, whatever. But that still hasn't even put a dent in the housing crisis.
Yeah. There's a huge influx of people coming in, and there's still not enough space for everyone. And that's what we've seen, especially BYU has a unique advantage in that way of being a church school. People grow up thinking about coming to BYU. Now, I'm sure in other states and other universities, you grow up thinking that you're going to go to the big school, but yet BYU attracts really students from all over due to religious beliefs. They want to be surrounded by the culture, the values, and that same honor code that you talk about. They look for that in their university experience. And so you have a bunch of people that are coming from out of state just to come to BYU. And if you're already having such a big shortage in housing, just adds to the problem for a lot of people, but it adds to the benefit for a landlord if you own a property that you're able to rent out.
Absolutely. So with that, let me pull up this graphic right here. So I want to really make it clear for potential prospective landlords the interaction of supply and demand from a economic standpoint, show you what's going on in BYU and UVU housing here. So right here, I've got the rental rates by year, and you can kind of see where they started out in 2001 here at $245 for a shared room in a large complex. I'm just going to kind of use that column to gauge
That
things.
would be nice. 245.
Seriously, right? Well, it's funny. I remember even in 2013 when I was my freshman year at UVU, and we rented in Carriage Cove, and I got $275 for a private room.
Dang. Private.
Yeah, it was private.
Whoa.
And I don't know how we scored that. I have no idea. But it was pretty awesome. Now that's absolutely unheard of. Because of this huge influx of students, the way that supply and demand, the way that they're interacting has really squeezed these rental prices. You can see in 2020 to 2021, a large complex was $390 for a shared room. I'd say that's probably low.
I would say super low.
That's lower than, like, again, when you were renting things out in 2020, 2021, you said you were at $400 for a shared room. Granted, that was in a townhome that was a little more off campus. Now I know, and that's 2021, 2020 and 2021 kind of prior to the big housing boom.
Yeah.
And now I think we're seeing $550 for a shared room, $500. Crazy.
Yeah.
Crazy. But when you're making such a small mortgage payment and when you're able to rent to 2 students a room, pretty easy to cover that payment, right?
Insane. Yeah, I saw this video of someone that was taking a poll just walking around BYU campus, and that was one of the responses was they had 6 people in a condo at $550 a shared room. And if you're pulling in $3,000 a month plus for a shared bedroom condo, that is incredible.
Right.
I mean, you're not even coming close to what that actual mortgage payment would be.
And if you're going to pay that anyway,
Yeah.
like your student, like depending on whether you're a student or a parent of a student, you're going to pay that anyway. If you're helping subsidize your student's rent, you're helping support them in college so they can really focus on school, you're going to pay that. Why not cover your mortgage with other people's rent and, allow your student to build wealth, allow them to build good credit. It just makes sense.
Well, and at that rental rate, given it could be a dramatic example, might not be applicable to absolutely every single property that's out there, but yet at that point, you wouldn't even be coming out of pocket for anything. You wouldn't have to pay the $550 for a shared room for your student if that's the plan, or they would be alleviated of that stress because it's being covered by their roommates. And so I think that that's the beauty behind where we're headed with this. But I would say, and this is more of, since you bring up occupancy and rental rates, and how does it look in Provo, Orem areas if people, because we talked about people coming to BYU for from out of state, do they go back home to visit family? What do summer months look like? Is that a big concern that you see with a lot of your clients when it comes to rental rates? Are they vacant for long periods of time, or how does that work?
Yeah, great question. I think that's something that landlords worry about a lot with college housing. Is what, there's seasonality there. There's a fall semester and a spring semester, and everyone heads home for the summer. While that can be true, you mentioned earlier, you talk about how everybody's signing leases, 6 months, a year early. In my experience, I was always signing a year lease when I lived in BYU housing, and then I would have to try to sell my contract for the summer. So I think there's a lot of that goes on because the demand for housing is so high, and because I think year-round school is becoming more and more prevalent, or at least, people doing a summer block. And I think there's a first summer block and a second summer block, and people are really trying to hammer out those semesters so that they can finish early, so that they can have they can have cheaper housing, because typically you can get a better deal on housing in the summer. So I think that there are a lot of factors that have contributed to contributed to higher occupancy for landlords in UVU and BYU areas than you would experience maybe in a different college town.
Well, and especially just the demand shortage, because if you think about all the people that want in on these contracts, but there's nowhere to live, there's no contracts available. If you sell one, goes pretty quick most of the time, and then when you come back, you have to figure out where to live, because there's always new students, there's new recruiting classes,
Totally.
there's definitely a demand for it. And that's what I think a lot of people are worried about, is if they don't renew that contract or if they try to sell it, where are they going to live when they come back next semester?
Yeah.
And I think that that's huge when it comes to vacancy rates as well as the year-long occupancy.
Yep, 100%. So we did touch on this a little bit as well. We talked about tenants and how you select tenants and how you minimize the risk of getting a bad tenant. And, you know, students can be really rough typically on houses and on housing. I think you and I overall had really good experiences with
no
tenants.
Complaints on my end.
I mean, it helps, definitely helps when you've got your child living in the condo or the townhome, because they're managing everything. They're keeping an eye on everything. However, as a landlord, especially if you're going to have, you know, maybe you have a student that's coming this semester and then maybe they'll get married and maybe your next kid will come. And so you kind of, maybe you have a lineup of people in your family. I know that kind of was a situation for you and your family, right? You're the second oldest. I know your brother also bought a townhome.
Yeah.
And you kind of were all going to BYU. So that's a really pretty common situation.
Yeah. We all live in the same cul-de-sac.
Yeah.
It's nice.
It's awesome. Your setup's super cool. Super cool. But, you know, to that point, I just think there's a lot of benefit in having the student on site, you know, kind of as a co-manager of the property.
Well, I think they take it much more seriously for the most part, as well as I don't know much about UVU housing, but BYU housing, you had cleaning checks, right?
Totally.
You had people coming in making sure that the property was well maintained and to the status of the requirements of the landlord. And so I think that my experience was, since I owned the townhome, since I lived there and took pride in that, luckily I had incredible roommates, a bunch of friends that were very organized, neat people. Not all the time. I mean, we're college students, and so life gets a little bit crazy, but it was not hard to have a conversation of, hey guys, can we do this a little bit different? Or, hey, can we pick up here? And I think that it makes it a little bit more relaxed of a scenario, which is a huge selling point for a lot of people, because who wants to have some random person coming into the house doing cleaning checks to make sure it's up to par?
Yeah, totally. But that being said, I think that when you've got a student that is sort of managing the property, there's a lot of pride, and especially if they're a co-signer. This was true in my case. I felt a lot of pride of ownership, where I didn't really care in a rental because I was going to be moving out. But when it was my house, when I was on title, I took care of that thing, you know. I cleaned carpets, I did dishes, I did stuff outside of the realm of what I'd normally do as a tenant, because I wasn't a tenant. I was a property owner. Yeah. And I wouldn't say I demanded that from my tenants. It's not like I was a dictator in my townhome, but I think people knew. I think they're like, oh, like my landlord lives with me. And so they were kind of naturally a little bit more respectful. Yeah. But that being said, if you don't have a situation where your student is going to be there on the property, there are great ways. Like I talked about Rentler. Rentler will do a credit and a background check. So that's great. A lot of the students won't have credit, at least a lot of credit, lots of credit history. But you can contact previous landlords. Rentler will see if they've had any previous evictions on their credit. And that, they charge that application fee to the tenant. So you really don't, like I said, you don't even have to worry. And the honor code plays as annoying as it can be to students who like kind of want to party with no regard. It's great for landlords, right? Having that faith-based university that has a strong moral compass for those and strong, high standards for people that are going to school is important and is great for landlords because you have to sign a document, right? I think if I'm not wrong.
Well, and everyone, the nice thing about BYU is whether you obey the honor code or not, that's up to the individual. Obviously, there's no policing that I'm aware of that goes into that. And I think what I'm getting at is they're aware of the expectations. No matter what, the fact that it's in their mind or that it's an actual document or something that is expected when you go to BYU, that helps dramatically. I think it's very different than, it's extremely different than a lot of universities out there, and it just demands a higher level of respect and integrity for a lot of these tenants that's already built in and has nothing to do with the actual property, which is great.
Yeah, 100%. That being said as well, that's a service that we offer for sure at Campus View Real Estate, helping our clients with the tenant selection process. I know a lot of our owners are absentee owners. They manage the property from out of state. Maybe they, live back east and they're sending their kids to BYU. Definitely can hook you up with the right people, help you with understanding the tenant selection process and making it easier, more of a walk in the park. We want to make sure that our clients have an excellent experience when it comes to getting their properties rented, realizing that high return on investment that is totally possible and achievable in BYU and UVU housing space.
Yeah, well, and you're in a unique position and wanted to ask about your story a little bit because you mentioned in the previous episode that you lived in the townhome in Provo, right? And then you moved to Kentucky or Indiana, Kentucky and then Indiana, right?
Right.
And you owned a home in Indiana?
Yep.
And what did you do with Westbridge? I think you mentioned that you rented it out, correct?
Yeah, I rented it out, and again, that's another service. So
with property management?
Yeah,
okay.
Right. So that's where I was going with that is we have property managers that we work with that are great, that are minimal on their fees, and yet take really good care of the tenants and the properties.
What's a typical fee that you'd expect?
So I paid 8% of gross rents.
Okay.
Toward property management, which was, and I didn't have to pay a leasing fee. Some will charge a leasing fee equivalent to 50% of a month's rent or something along those lines.
Okay.
I didn't personally have to pay that. My property manager was fantastic. The only time I ever got bugged was if, appliance went out and I had to approve an expense. But my property manager would take care of replacing the thing. They'd take care of leaks. They'd take care of any issues with the physical property. And it gave me a lot of peace of mind. And
that's so nice.
Oh yeah.
To be, across the country and not have to worry about a nice cash flowing asset that, really you only think about when the expense report comes in every so often. But besides that, incredible to have that lifted off.
It was great. It was amazing. And just to reiterate kind of what happened to us, like the real life success story, is we both got into these townhomes. I just sold mine last year. And I sold it because this last year. And I sold it because we were looking to get into another property that was better suited for our family, and ended up making, $100,000+ from when I bought it, just because, and that was in addition to those cash flows that I'd received on a monthly basis when we rented it, the cash flows that I was making when my tenants were paying the mortgage, and the depreciation that I was able to take, like the tax benefits, the mortgage interest write-offs to itemize on my taxes.
So much that goes into it.
So it's seriously, if you're going to have a kid in school for the next 4 years, you got to think about it. Like, to me, it's a no-brainer, but you have to at least compare the two situations, renting versus buying. People complain about the high interest rates right now. How much interest is rent? It's 100% interest.
Yeah.
You don't pay any principal on rent. There's no benefit.
Well, if you've got an entire family, a bunch of kids or married couples living here in Utah, because you're the perfect example of what I wanted to touch on, and that's lived in Utah, moved to the Midwest, right? Came back to Utah. Plan is to stay in Utah.
Yep.
A lot of people are in a very, very similar position. They come to Utah for one thing or another. Typically, it's for school or for job opportunities. Love it so much, they stay here, they raise families here, then grandparents start moving in. And there's an interesting statistic that I came across from the University of Utah that said Utah County added the most population this past year in net migration, with an estimated 23,980 new residents, or just over 39% of the state's population growth.
Holy smokes.
So if you think about Utah County, now we're a little bit more specific as far as Orem and Provo, but yet there's another statistic that we'll talk about here shortly, but you have 39% of Utah's population growth here in Utah County. A huge aspect of that is going to be these young individuals that are coming here for school and staying put. They get married, they raise their families, they don't want to leave. I mean, there's so much that Utah has to offer. We love it here, and a lot of people do too.
Plus, Utahns are notorious baby makers.
True.
So
big families.
I had an economist. It was pretty funny. I was listening to an economic update, and he said, you all complain about all these Californians and these people that are moving into Utah, but your population growth is not happening from people coming to the state. It's happening in your master bedrooms.
Love it.
I just had to laugh. I was like, that's super true. And like you were saying, these kids have kids. They traditionally have larger families. Grandparents moved to Utah to be close to kids. It's kind of a universal story that has led to Utah just booming. And they say that I believe that the forecast is that Utah County's population is supposed to far surpass Salt Lake County's by 2040.
Jeez.
And so Utah County is exploding. Great place to be a landlord.
Yeah.
And tell us about at Provo specifically.
Well, that was the next thing that I was going to bring up is this is coming from another article that says that Provo, Utah is the #1 fastest growing city in the U.S. And
wow.
Living in Provo, I would think, really? Like, that's crazy. I wouldn't have thought that we're #1. I see the growth. I see all the people coming here, but to be #1 just speaks to the demand of why there's a huge housing shortage in the first place for everyone. Yep. And if you can get your hands on a property, I mean, the sky's the limit. And speaking to the big families that we just talked about, it's the perfect example. If you've got 6 kids coming to BYU over the course of 15 years, why wouldn't you look into a townhome or a condo or something that, I mean, they're always going to need housing, whether it's student housing or married housing. You take one kid out, swap them in with the next, and you just keep it rolling.
That's right. Roll it on over. Yep. So I think we kind of touched on everything we want to touch on today. To sum it up, BYU, UVU, Provo, Orem is a great place to be a landlord. You can feel comfortable and confident looking at least looking at the numbers, checking out the difference between renting and buying as a parent of a student or as a student who's financially savvy. Look at it. Just take a look at it. Consider the factors that we've been talking about here today on the show, and give us a call. Give us a call. Let us help you walk through it. Utilize our expertise, our connections with BYU housing, our connections with property management. We've been doing this for a long time. So give us a call. Let us help. For us, it was a no-brainer, and I sincerely believe for most people it's going to be a no-brainer. Yeah. If you have the money to do it. And again, we talked about this last time, and we'll dive into it further in future episodes, but you can get in for 3.5% down.
Yeah.
So again,
you don't even have to have that much money to get in.
If it's a $250,000 condo, that's less than $10,000 to close.
Yeah.
So you don't have to have a ton of money. No. You just have to have a little bit.
Yeah.
And
run the numbers, see if it makes sense. But exactly like you said, if rent's 100% interest, it's like a slow. I mean, you could say it's a high yield depending on appreciation rates, but it's definitely not 100% as far as rent is concerned. So I think it's worth penciling it out. See if it's right for you. What's the plan for the next year, the next 5 years? Do you have more kids? And I think that you'll find the benefits very much outweigh the cost.
Totally. So Josh and I could talk forever, as you guys can see. We do. We'll talk till we're blue in the face. We're super passionate. We love real estate.
We love because BYU.
I'll talk till I'm green in the face. Go Wolverines. Is that what I decided the sign was? I think so.
I think that's a wolf.
A wolf and a Wolverine. We'll have to discuss the differences on a future episode.
I like it.
But thank you for tuning in. We're happy to help you. I'm going to, throw my number up on the screen here, throw our contact information down in the description. If this is helpful, please like, subscribe, hit the notification bell. Be notified of our upcoming videos, our shorts, anything that we're doing, all pertaining to BYU, UVU housing, and how landlords can maximize their return on investment while their students are in school. We will see you next week. Thanks again.
Thanks for tuning in. See you guys.